The Planning Commission meeting to order for February 12th, 2015. Happy New Year to everybody, since we haven't met since December. At this point, I'd like to mention that all of the commissioners and the new ones are present, as well as staff, and asked you to join with me in a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Next, we have the swearing-in of not only the newly appointed commissioners, but it's my understanding that Karen is going to lead us in a complete swearing-in.
Yes. Okay. I state your names.
Fawn McLaughlin.
Do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
I
I
solemnly
do.
swear.
Okay. And if you'll sign your names on the line.
We don't have to repeat it.
Thank you very much. And I would like to welcome the new planning commissioners, and thank you for volunteering, and we're looking forward to working with you. So our next item of business is the selection of the planning commissioner, chair, and vice chair. So are there any nominations?
I nominate Fawn McLaughlin to be chair.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much for your vote of confidence. I'll do my best. And then also the selection for the vice chair. Is there a nomination?
I nominate Ted Allred to be vice chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, Ted. The motion carries, and congratulations.
That's kind of like last year, isn't it?
Sort of. Oh, well, good. Thank you very much. Are there any agenda changes?
No, they're not.
Okay. So our next item of business is a public comment period. So anybody in the audience that would like to address the commission on an item that is not on our agenda today, this would be your opportunity to come forth.
I'd like to say good morning to the commission. I'd like to start off my remarks this morning with...
Excuse me, sir. Could you please state your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. I wrote it down. I thought, gee, I got to do it twice. Okay. Bill
Thank you,
McManus,
sir.
Hanford Hill.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start my comments today by acknowledging one of the new commissioners on this board, and that's Mr. David Tuno. I've known David for a number of years. I'm excited about him being on the commission. David's reputation precedes his service here, and I would like to thank him publicly for his service to this community over many years, and thank him for his commitment to serve in the future. He is a man of the highest integrity, not given to hyperbole, knows what he's doing. What he says is backed up by fact, and I think he's going to be a very welcome addition to the board. I would also like to publicly thank and acknowledge the stellar appointment made by Supervisor Kearney on the Board of Supervisors. So I think it's going to be a good 4 years. I'd like to continue my comments now, if I may. Coming up for review by the Commission and the Board of Supervisors are a couple very important projects, the first of which is the general plan. Second of which are the ordinances that will be used to control the growing of marijuana in this county. In looking at the paper on Tuesday, I was dismayed to see that some of the drug kingpins of this county are trying to create a landing zone in the general plan prior to the ordinances being developed. I think that they want to codify their criminal behavior by having it in the general plan before we get there. And I would like to voice my opinion that the board not tolerate things coming in from the side and do them in an orderly manner. Let's get the general plan taken care of. Let's get the ordinances out for review and adoption. And then if there's something that needs to be done after that between pot growing and the general plan, we can do it then. I would also like to comment, and I'm a little sad to see the comments of some of the realtors in this county when the headline in this Calaveras Enterprise describes Calaveras County as a county of hope and dope. And then they go on to almost laughingly talk about the property boom in this county, which is pretty much tied to vacant land that has water available. And if commissions on property can be put before the welfare of the county, I'm very deeply disappointed in the realtors. So I hope that the Planning Commission does this in a neat, orderly way and well thought out. And then hopefully we won't get in any problems down the line. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. Wrong one. Sure, that's fine. Good morning, Colleen Platt with MyValleySprings.com and a member of the Calaveras Planning Coalition. And I wanted to bring this before the Planning Commission today because it's especially relevant to the Planning Commission. This project started at the Planning Commission about 6 years ago. It's called On the Record Meeting Video Project. And for those of you who weren't here at that time, which is quite a few of you, the Planning Commission wasn't videotaped at that time. It was recorded, but not videotaped. So a lot of people who could not come to the meetings, never knew what was going on here. And our organization formed with the goal of getting the public involved in government meetings and the planning process. So there were some important projects going on at that time, some big public hearings that we thought were important for people to see. So we videotaped one of the meetings. And it led to a discussion about whether the Planning Commission should be videotaped on a regular basis. And that came before the Planning Commission at that time, and they all talked about it and made that decision that they thought that was a good idea to videotape the meetings regularly. There wasn't any funding at the time, so our organization paid for the videotape, the videotaping done. And we also posted it on our websites for the public to view so the people could start paying attention to what was going on. So anyway, that's what started it 6 years ago. So it was February and it's the 6-year anniversary. And so we're just letting people know who don't know this already that there's meeting videos available on the calaverascap.com website. And we've been doing this for 6 years, starting with the Planning Commission, but it also includes the Board of Supervisor meetings. It includes now CCWD meetings that was started this last year, in addition to Planning Commission meetings, and we also videotape other public meetings that are planning-related meetings, like if there's general plan workshops that are going on that the county isn't taping, we will videotape those. If the Planning Coalition has public forums, we also videotape the Planning Coalition's meetings. There was one last September about water in Calaveras County, and so we videotaped that. That is posted on the Calaveras Cap website. And then there was a general plan update workshop in January and Mokelumne Hill that we videotaped, and some of you were there. That's also posted on the Calaveras CAP website. So this is basically an announcement to those of you who are not aware of that, and a reminder to those of you who are, that those meetings are archived back to 2009 and 2010. So if you have any questions on what happened in the past in a project, you can go back and see the public comments. Comments by commissioners, by supervisors, so you can, it's a learning tool also. You can go back and kind of see how things happened. Each new meeting video is posted normally within a day of the meeting, so they're they're posted in a timely fashion. Planning Commission meetings are also available at the library for people who don't have computer access. You can actually use the video, the DVD there at the library. This is made possible through a partnership between the nonprofit organizations of the CAP, the Community Action Project, and MyValleySprings.com. And also the video files are provided courtesy of Calaveras Public Access Television and the kind people who work there. So basically, this is for citizens who aren't able to attend the meetings, and also for educational purposes. So visit Calaveras, www.calaverascap.com. Go to the video box at the top of the homepage, and you can just, by date, look at the current and archive videos up there. So there's a couple extra handouts up here if anybody wants any. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you. It's a great public service, and it's also a good reminder, especially for new commissioners, that it's important to speak into the microphone for those people that are listening at home, as well as looking at those archived meetings. Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't see any.
Okay. We're going to move on to the consent agenda, which is the approval of minutes from the December 11th, 2014 Planning Commission meeting. Are there?
I don't see any agendas. I didn't see any.
Do we have an extra agenda? I guess that's what he's.
I can give you mine. Oh, no, I can't. Sorry, wait a minute. Found them. I grabbed them by accident. I apologize. They were underneath my pile.
Okay, now we have the agenda issue resolved.
There we go.
So are there any corrections or revisions to the minutes from December 11th? No? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
It's been moved? Seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
So we shall move on to our public hearings, and we have one public hearing today, which,
Excuse me, on that last vote, were
two abstentions.
two abstentions. I just didn't hear that recorded in the record, so you guys were here, so I
Right.
just assumed that was.
I voted aye.
Okay.
Okay.
You were actually in the audience, so if I recall, so you probably,
Say again?
you were in the audience, so you heard the meeting?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
I have no reason to vote no. So if
Yeah.
it's required that I abstain because I wasn't here,
I'm not sure. Julie, do you know, as far as voting on the minutes, if the commissioner was not at the meeting, must they abstain, or?
No, I don't know offhand. I don't know if you want the commission to allow me to take 5-minute recess.
Yeah.
if we
I
want to
don't-
cover our base on that, I will change my vote to abstain, and then we won't have a problem.
Probably just for, safety's sake.
Fine.
Let's just do that. Thank you.
So just to clarify, 3 aye votes and 2 abstentions. Okay. Moving on to public hearings, 2014-044s and amendments to Title 17 related to density bonus. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Maurer, our planning director.
Thank you. The county currently has a density bonus ordinance. It's in chapter, the right section here, 1704-200, the county code. It was adopted in 1986, amended in 87, and there's been no changes since then. There have been several changes at the state level, one of which is that, well, numerous changes. One of the provisions of the state law is that whether the county has an ordinance that reflects state law or not, the state law applies. And to the degree that we take any action today, it really is sort of moot as far as what standards apply with regard to density bonus. But the reason why we are moving this forward now is that we are in the process of updating our housing element. These are one of the things that we said we would do in the 2010 update. And as we go through our housing element review with the State Housing and Community Development Department, we want to demonstrate that we have indeed implemented some of the programs we identified that we would do. So the approach that I took on this was to simply refer to the provisions of state law so we don't fall into the trap in the future of when they change the law again, which they're likely to do at some point in time in the future, we don't have to go back and amend our code. We are still just referring to those provisions that apply to the county in the state code. In the back of the packet is, I think attachment 4, is all the provisions of the state law. Many jurisdictions will actually incorporate all of this into the code. There are 12, 13, 14 pages of text that apply, and it just seems sort of redundant to copy all of that into our code when it is likely that it could change again sometime in the future. So my recommendation is our ordinance to simply refer to the state code provisions, and again, if and when they are amended, then the new standards will still apply. Some of the major differences are that our current code requires the application of a plan development to benefit from a density bonus, and the state law strictly prohibits that. You cannot require a discretionary action for the sole purpose of applying density bonus. Now, in some cases, we already have a plan development overlay on some of the properties, and they would still be subject to that regulation. It's not because of the density bonus that the PD would apply, it's because the zoning, any development on that site would require the plan development application. The calculation for how much bonus is applied varies greatly from the current standards that we have. It's a very complex formula depending on what level of affordability is provided, the number of units, the type of affordability. So there's 2 or 3 pages of charts of how to calculate what that is. And again, rather than include that in our code, it just seems to make sense to refer to it. One of the concerns often is that when people are doing a development, they want to have everything in one place. They know what they need to do. With affordable housing projects, most of the builders, the people involved in affordable housing, are very well aware of the state code requirements, and I don't think it's going to be a problem that an individual or builder is not going to know what those standards are and where to find them, because they're used to doing that. I mean, most of the affordable housing is done by organizations such as Mercy Housing or Habitat for Humanity or other organizations like that, and they are very aware of the provisions in state code to assist in making housing projects affordable. We did have a comment from Caltrans expressing concern on the environmental document that I prepared. I have found that this would not have a significant impact. They raised concerns that the potential increase in density could raise traffic and air quality concerns. I did some further analysis based on those comments, and my conclusion is, based on the size of the projects, the size of the potential projects we have on the currently zoned properties that we have, those that don't already have the plan development overlay, that most of these projects would be quite small, would not have a significant project impact on roads and air quality. And so I've come to the conclusion that there would not be a significant impact. I sent a copy of my response to Caltrans, and they have not further responded to that, so I think they're satisfied. With that, I would recommend that the Commission adopt a resolution 2015-01 to authorize the Chair to sign a resolution recommending that the Board of Supervisors adopt the negative declaration and approve 2014-044 zoning ordinance amendment, amending section 1704-200 of the Calaveras County Code. Are there any questions or any more specifics you'd like me to discuss regarding the
Do we need
ordinance?
to have two actions for the negative deck and accepting the resolution?
No, it's a single resolution that includes both the environmental document and the adoption of the ordinance.
Are there any other questions of Peter right now?
Is this where we would discuss all of our questions, or can we go back and forth? Can I revisit an area after subsequent discussion?
Well, if you have questions, now would be the appropriate time.
Okay. On the process, Caltrans made comments about our inclusion of state-mandated code into our housing element, correct?
That's correct.
Did Caltrans make the same comments in Sacramento when they were passing this code?
I had the very same thought. I doubt it, but I don't know.
Well, okay, so for the people of Calaveras County, they see that Caltrans has a problem with our adopting this, but we don't have a choice in adopting it. So what's Caltrans' point? If you can speak for...
I don't know. I think that they are looking at it in the narrow focus of what this ordinance does without having visited the issue when the state law passed several years ago that requires us to do this.
Yeah, we don't, so we don't know what Caltrans' point was in Sacramento if they ever made one.
I don't know.
And their point in commenting now is what, to have something on the record? Okay.
I can't speak for them.
With respect to our adoption, the language that, point me to the page where you've got it crossed out, the existing language of the housing element, there it is. On
This would be on attachment 2.
starting at page 1 on here. Okay. On page 2, you've got language crossed out. That's the existing language from the housing element, correct?
That's existing language from the county code.
In the county code?
Yes.
But it's from the housing element, correct?
No, the housing element is a component of the general plan. That is, attachment 5 has some excerpts of what's in the housing element. The ordinance would implement the provisions of the general plan housing element.
Okay. One of my questions is the language that we're substituting, and that starts on bottom of page 2, goes to 3 and 4, is a good deal longer than the language that we're crossing out.
Yes.
Okay? If all we need to do is say, with respect to the density bonus, see Appendix A, and that's the state code, then why can't we just do that? Are we adding anything in here by virtue of allowable leeway that the county may still have, to which Caltrans is reacting, or are we adding anything at all? Poorly worded question.
We aren't putting anything in the county code other than what's required of the state. The purpose for the organization and the language that's in this is to sort of clarify what section of the state law applies in what situation.
Okay, so this new language just points people to the right spot.
Yes.
Okay, one of the spots it points people to is section F. I'm trying to remember where the significance of section F is. But section F,
It's on page 3.
yes. And I was looking in the state code for section F for what, and I found some Fs, if you will, but I don't know if I found the F.
Would you mind if I made a clarifying comment? Is that okay? I'm Julie Moss Lewis. I'm a deputy county counsel here. I helped Mr. Mauer write this code, and to answer, Mr. Tuno, your question about why didn't we just literally just refer everybody directly to the state code? The
Yeah.
state code had some optional segments in there where if a county wished to add additional density bonuses and what have you, then it could have. And so to the extent that there were portions of the code, of the state code, that allowed for options, we basically made the decision to just go with the default. And so to clarify that, we picked the code sections of the state code and referred directly to them so as not to make the public wonder whether we were actually agreeing just to the state law defaults or whether we were in fact intending to go beyond them. And so that was the reason for actually naming certain subsections of state code in here. There was a section with a planned unit, planned development, or combining district. I don't know, Mr. Mauer, you're more aware of that than I am, that was not in state code, but we kept a portion of that in our code. And I honestly don't remember the rationale for that, but we did keep something about a combining district in our code. And perhaps Mr. Mauer will remember why.
I think you may
we're
be
doing
referring to section C, the top of page 3 of the ordinance, where it says that we will process applications concurrently if there is a discretionary application. And that would be primarily because of a planned development. I'm not sure what other section
Let me
you're
see
referring
if I could find the section.
You're looking at the attachment 4 now?
Right now, I'm looking at what we actually wrote in as our
Yes,
proposed,
attachment 4.
as our proposed code.
I think she's looking at the language referring to section 4, or attachment 4, right?
I'm sorry, attachment 2.
Yes.
Is the ordinance, the draft ordinance. So there's 2 sections where we refer to discretionary actions. One is on top of page 2, it's subsection C, also subsection H on the top of page 4, also refers to when it's combined with another application.
There's also, I'm looking at also, on page 3, there's subsection G, says incentives in excess of the quantity available pursuant to paragraph D may be granted subject to the adoption of a planned unit development combining district. And so that, for example, was not, I did not see that language in state law. I don't know, I don't remember what the relevance is, or if it, of what that was. So I don't know if that answers your question about why we don't go exactly to the state code.
You may have raised a new one here. On D, are you saying that that developments as few as 5 dwellings were not addressed in the state code?
No, I'm not referring to D. What I was referring to was actually in G. I'm trying to give an example of language that might be in our proposed code that wasn't referred to in state law, which would explain why we wouldn't necessarily adopt identical what the state law has in it. And that would be one small section that I don't remember seeing a corollary for in state code. The other reason to not adopt state code is, again, many of the provisions of the state code actually give options where it'll say, for example, here are the minimums for density bonuses, and then if you want, the Board of Supervisors can adopt further bonuses. And so if we refer just to that code section without clarifying that we're only allowing the minimum.
Okay.
That was the reason for, because the Board of Supervisors hasn't at this point adopted anything that went beyond those state law provisions. And so rather than leaving somebody reading the code with a question as to whether that actually happened, we just went with the code sections from state law that provide the mandatory minimums that we have to we have to give. That was the
Right, so,
reason for it.
so for clarity, for a simple person like myself, the state allows counties to go, to provide greater
Yes.
density bonuses, but not less, of
Right,
course.
that's correct.
And we are, for the people of the county, they'll know now that we are not increasing anything. We're not adopting any options that go beyond the.
State law.
The limited, the minimums of state law.
That's correct. However, it's still open to us to do so. The board could subsequently choose to adopt additional. But that's basically to make it simple, rather than leaving a reader of our code wondering, well, wait a second, okay, I'm referred to state law. And state law says how, a board of supervisors can grant more. They don't have to have the question about whether or not we've granted more. If we granted more subsequently, then we could amend this code to show that we did that.
And might the reason that we have G referring to plan development is because we have plan development overlay zone. So, I mean, we have to accommodate it since it already exists in our code.
That's probably why that's in there. And then, yes, it says incentives offered pursuant to this section may be adopted and modified by the Board of Supervisors by resolution. So we don't foreclose the possibility of later adopting additional incentives, but we're just going to make it clear to the public that right now, this is what the state tells us we need at a minimum, so we're referring you to the state law that goes into detail about how those minimums are calculated, what the charts are, and all of that, rather than just filling up our code with the exact same charts that are in the state law.
That second sentence of paragraph G, however, does allow the board to consider, on a case-by-case, project-by-project basis, through a plan development application, additional incentives.
Right.
So there's two components. There's the sort of by right component, that someone comes in with a building permit, they meet the criteria of state law, they meet the criteria of the code, they are granted the density bonus without any discretionary action by the planning commission or the board. If someone asks for more than that through a plan development application, they could do so, and we would analyze that on a project-by-project basis.
Okay, so discretionary actions of the board come into play only if they want more.
Right.
And we're not automatically saying no. We're
Right.
just looking at it on a project-by-project basis.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, let me go back to a Peter question. Why is our adoption,
Thank you, Julie.
thank you very much. Why is the county's adoption of this code even subject to a CEQA?
Because it is a project under the definition of CEQA, any ordinance amendment. It's just, I agree with you. I was equally frustrated when I looked at that and said, why are we preparing an ordinance that we have to, we're mandated to adopt, but because we do have some flexibility, we could grant a greater. So we have discretion on this.
I see, yeah.
Yeah.
If you went beyond it, then that would kick in, but if you're just adopting it, what the heck? All right.
Yeah.
Now, let me get some clarification on what the state code, what it means to developers. If I've got a parcel of land and it's appropriately zoned, and I say, and it's appropriately zoned for 20 units, and I say, I'm going to designate 2 of those low income in a certain category of low income. That's 10%.
Yes.
That 10% allows me some percentage, I'm not looking at the table, but some percentage of increase in the density of my so maybe my parcel number increases to 25 or something, right?
Right.
Those extra 5 units are not low income units, just the 2 that I've designated.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, with that entitlement, how potentially does that impact other requirements that the county may have for the development, to wit, landscaping, setbacks, trees and whatnot, that amenities, we'll call it, well, let's say design amenities. If the county says, for these developments, we want these kinds of amenities because we don't want a lousy looking development that's going to sit there for 100 years, hypothetically. does the developers have the right to then say, well, I'm entitled to these extra 5 units, and those are going to take up the space that you would otherwise require me to put in a planter and some trees, so therefore, that's out, and there's nothing you can do about it.
No,
He does not have that
he
right.
does not have that right. Now, this is where the state law gets a little bit grayer. They do have the ability to ask for other incentives and concessions, and that could be a reduction in parking requirements. It could be a reduction in landscaping requirements. And it doesn't really say how we are to judge that. And I believe that our best bet would be, if that's the case, they're asking for additional incentives, then it kicks it into that plan development process, and we can look at, gee, if for us to be able to provide that affordability, we need to reduce our standards, the setback, reduce it slightly, or reduce landscape, or whatever it might be that they're asking for. And we would look into the analysis of, well, how does that provide for the affordability? So there's...
Well, I wasn't even anticipating that parking requirements and setbacks would even be on the table, but you're saying that that could be.
And the state law specifically addresses parking. It says you can, that they have the right to request a reduction in parking, and there's a minimum standard that has to be met there.
Okay, so for this hypothetical project, the county can be looking at a discretionary change in its policies to accommodate the plan. And if the county says, no, where you want to build this thing, we want to stick to our guns and require the setbacks and require the parking and require the landscape amenity, that component, now where does that put us? Does that put us in a fight with the guy who says, hey, state law says I can do these things? Now, are we inviting, legal action for such a project?
I think we could. Let me read one section of the state law. In no case may a city, county, or city and county apply any development standard that will have the effect of physically precluding the construction of a development meeting the criteria of subdivision B at the densities, blah, blah, blah. So there is a standard that needs to be demonstrated that if we don't grant these concessions, these incentives, that it precludes the ability. And I think that's a fairly high bar to cross, preclusion. It's not just, it makes it more challenging, it makes it more difficult. You have to say, you can't build it as we're at the density that we're allowed to build if these standards are in place. And I think that there's ways that we could demonstrate that you could build something. And that's sort of the negotiation process that we would go through with a developer to find out, it's not just because this is the design we want to build. Maybe they just need to scale back the size of the living room a little bit.
Okay, now that's
those
what I
are
was...
the kinds of things that we would work with the applicant to come up with a plan that meets the density requirements, meets the intent of the state law, as well as meeting our standards to the best we can to make it a project that we want to see in our community.
But there's not there's no hard line there
There
that tells
isn't.
the county this is what you can and cannot do.
Whatever you want to define preclusion to be.
So
Julie-
if I could speak to this also a little bit more, looking at the code, under 65915A, okay, of the government code, it says, when an applicant seeks a density bonus...
What page are you on, Julie?
I'm sorry, I'm on the page 1 of attachment 4.
Okay.
Okay. When an applicant seeks a density bonus for a housing development within or for the donation of land for housing within the jurisdiction of a city, county, or city and county, that local government shall provide the applicant with incentives or concessions for the production of housing units and child care facilities as prescribed in this section, okay? All cities, counties, or cities and counties shall adopt an ordinance that specifies how compliance with the section will be implemented. So then it gives a bunch of, minimum requirements in order to be entitled as a matter of state law to the density bonus. With respect to the term incentives or concessions, okay, you can go to subsection K, which is on page 10 of attachment 4. And it says, for the purposes of this chapter, concession or incentive, okay, which the developer shall be entitled to at a ratio depending on how many units he's building and for what incomes, okay? It means any of the following. It could be a reduction in site development standards or a modification of zoning code requirements or architectural design requirements, okay? Including but not limited to a reduction in setback and square footage requirements and in the ratio of vehicular parking spaces. And that's one of the concessions or incentives that a developer might be entitled to based on what he's building. Another is...
Let me hold you up there.
Okay.
Peter was just mentioning, for example, a square footage requirement. Mr. Developer, you can do this, but you're going to have to, instead of 1,200 square foot units, you're going to have to go down to 1,100 square foot units. So that you can fit all your units in, and we still get what we want in the way of setbacks or parking or trees or whatever. Isn't that what that's saying?
I'm seeing this as saying that the developer gets extra things they wouldn't otherwise be allowed to have if they meet the requirements under state law as for being entitled to a concession or incentive. And then there's other sections that say, that put the burden back on the county to not stand in the way of that unless it can make written findings that public health, safety, or welfare or environmental damage is actually going to occur as a result of it. So the burden then becomes us via findings that would be challengeable. If we prevented the granting of a concession as defined under this code, we would have to justify it, and to the extent a court didn't agree that we adequately justified not granting it, then that's where liability could come in. But obviously there would be a process with environmental findings, public health safety findings, testimony, and what have you.
Okay.
But in terms of whether we give this, the default under state law is if they meet the ratios and income qualifications, then they are entitled to something on this list.
Okay, and we can, negotiate with the developer, but if the developer takes a hard line, the bar for us to defeat that plan is very high.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see, the Board of Supervisors could look at the list of incentives under state law, and potentially, I'd have to research this more, but potentially foreclose on some as long as some are still allowed. I think that's correct, that the Board of Supervisors can pick and choose, but they couldn't pick and choose necessarily on a per project basis. They could pick and choose what they're going to allow as a matter of county policy. And then a developer seeking one of the ones that is on the list provided by the Board of Supervisors. Okay, right now we're saying as a default that these are the possible concessions, and you get to elect which one, as long as you're entitled to it by state law. If the election is going to result in some sort of harm to the county or to the environment or to a historic building, then we can say, well, we're going to actually have to, we're telling you that we're going to not approve that because here's why, here's our findings, here's the evidence of how it's going to hurt something that is an allowable reason for a denial under state law, and then we have the burden of proof as a county at that point in terms of whether or not, proving up that it is valid for us to deny that particular concession.
Okay, did I just understand you to say that under K1, it's the developer who has the option of taking from the menu the concession that he's willing to play with?
The Board of my understanding of this, and it might require some additional research to be absolutely sure, but my understanding is the Board of Supervisors can select from the list of incentives it's offering. And then the developer, if he's entitled to, the entitlement is you get one concession, you get two concessions, you get three concessions based on, again, what he's building and for what income level. They can then pick from the list. And then at that point, we have to give those concessions unless they're, for some reason, a public health, safety, or
Right.
environmental. That's my understanding at this point. If there's a concern that the Planning Commission as a whole has on wanting to be much more exact with that, I could go back and do a memo on it. But at this point, that's my understanding. I don't know if that's Mr. Mauer's understanding as well. Pretty new to
Yeah,
land use.
The reality is, in 30 years of planning in rural jurisdictions, I have never come across a project that utilized a density bonus. That I've never come across a project that took advantage of the density bonus provisions of state law.
Oh, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Historically,
And
that's not a
so
problem.
it's not something that we deal with on a regular basis. It's, probably much more common in an urban area where, you have the ability because of, infrastructure and whatnot to be able to maximize the density. Typically, we struggle to get people to meet the minimum density in developing in rural counties. So I don't think we'll be seeing a lot of this, but it is there and it's available. To get back to your question on the conversation with Ms. Moss-Lewis was, Julie's right that we have the ability to sort of identify up front, these are the type of incentives that we would grant. But ultimately, the applicant sort of gets to select. Here's what we're proposing. This is what will make our project work. It is then sort of a negotiation process between the county and the applicant to try to come up with something that's functional for everyone. There may be some incentives. We may reduce things as long as. And this is not really much different than we would do with a plan development on something that is not a density bonus project, other than the fact that the county has ultimate authority to grant those kinds of incentives.
And here they don't.
And here we are constrained by the findings we would need to make that are much more strict than just simply we think this makes it a good project.
I think I get it.
Thank you again, Julie.
Thank you.
I've got 3 comments.
Okay.
Mr. Tuna was questioning where this subdivision F is, and I think it's on page 5 of this statute. And it's the one that describes what the density bonus are.
Kelly, when you say page 5, you're referring really to all the tables, aren't you?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Second point is, I thought I'd heard that state law was going to apply no matter what we did here, but it looks like 65915A right up front says all counties shall adopt an ordinance that specifies how this is going to work. So it looks like we have to adopt something or we're in violation of state law. That's why we're doing this, I guess. My last point, though, is kind of a question, which is, I'm not sure whether the way this is written will automatically take account of or change with later changes in state law. In other words, you adopt an ordinance right now, and the state law is what it is right now. I don't see language in here that says this ordinance will automatically be amended to reflect any applicable changes in state law. And without that kind of language, I'm not sure that we're not going to have to amend this thing every time the state law changes.
I think that you're correct to the extent that a subsection letter perhaps would change. So in other words, if we're referring to 65915K and suddenly it becomes an L, then yes, we would have to change that letter. That doesn't happen as often in state law as messing around with the language. It's fairly frequent, in my experience, that the actual text next to a written subsection would maybe be amended or changed, but if they add something new, it's usually at the bottom. But we would have to kind of pay attention to the lettering just to make sure that it's correct. Otherwise, we're stuck with just saying density bonuses shall be as pursuant to state law, and HCD might find that that's not enough, that we haven't really made a choice in certain areas about whether, for example, to give additional density bonuses is a matter of right or not. And so the balance here was to refer to state law in general through most of it, and basically refer to the defaults that were there. All right, and not to specifically call out additional incentives that we're making. There are some cities and counties that have a big political push for having affordable housing, and those counties and cities will add a whole bunch of additional language and additional local incentives for providing that housing. And since we're not doing that, I felt like we needed to at least go through and at least point out what sections, if we're looking at concessions and incentives, we're looking at subsection K. We're not looking at anything additional or less. And so I agree that we'll have to kind of pay attention to any letter changes that come up. But hopefully this will stay current enough that any amendments for the near future would just be within a given lettered subsection. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
I guess I do have one more comment, and that is on this subsection K we've been talking about. It's really pretty open-ended because the list is it says it's including but not limited to. And then it also has a little subsection that says, and any other idea that the developer or the county comes up with that's financially doable. So it is really an open-ended set of incentives or whatevers that can be in play here. There's nothing we can do about that. It's in state law.
Is there anyone in the public that would like to?
Did Lisa, did
Did you have a question? I'm sorry.
I did.
Lisa.
On the list of items that they can choose from through the state, you had indicated that the supervisors could select certain provisions out of there.
If we chose in our ordinance to come up with specific standards, that we sort of predetermined which ones, we could do that. I question whether or not that would stand a challenge, however. If someone came in and said, because of the language that Kelly had just referred to, that if we said, well, we're only going to allow these incentives, I think that someone else came in and said, well, we want this other incentive, the state law, in my opinion, limits our ability to say, well, no, that one's not applicable here. I guess Jill and I really hadn't had a chance to talk about that issue. I maybe disagree slightly with her interpretation that we would adopt a list of incentives. I think we could do that, but we'd have to come up with some very specific findings of why the incentives that we eliminated, that we didn't include in our list, would not be appropriate for Calaveras County.
Okay.
I think, and again, I didn't do extensive research on this because I didn't know this would be a
Julie,
question.
can you
Sorry.
come up to the?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I didn't do more extensive research on all of the possible hypotheticals that would come, out of this, and certainly I can. But, the most conservative interpretation without more research, I do agree with Peter, would be that under subsection K, that the state is specifically calling out that a reduction in site development standards is an incentive or a concession, specifically and parking could be as well. And then subsection 2 there, approval of mixed-use zoning in conjunction with the housing project. And then 3, it says we can add to the list. So I think the most conservative interpretation, without doing further research into what would be defensible and what wouldn't, would be to assume that the state listed the things that it specifically wanted to be concessions or incentives, and also gives the opportunity to the Board of Supervisors by ordinance or potentially on a project-by-project basis to add additional incentives.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Because some of the research that I looked at in other counties and how they were handling that list, in some of the comments that would come up was selective enforcement, that if they didn't have an applied list and you picked and choose what developer could do what, then it could become even a bigger liability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're being asked to select a list that would be applicable as our minimum list of incentives that to be applied on a countywide basis. That's what I think is being stated here. I think that, I don't know that it would be a challenge if we offered additional incentives on a specific project. I think if we refuse to allow a developer the benefit of something that was already on the list without making the findings we'd have to make about health, safety, welfare, environment, that we could wind up having a challenge. In terms of, getting into any more detail than that, I would have to do considerable research. So.
I think the bottom line here is that, the states recognize that housing is expensive in the state of California, and particularly housing for, low to moderate income families. And moderate income is, up to 120% of the median income, which basically covers all of my staff and probably 90% of the county employees, as well as teachers and firefighters and everyone else that we hear about with, the ability to find housing. And this is a means that the state has found to incentivize developers, not just building high-end homes, but also a range of housing. And I think that, if a developer came in with a project that, asked for some incentives in order to keep some of the costs down and to provide a range of rental or sales prices, and those are locked in for, I believe it's something like 30 or 50 years. So they're fairly long-term. It's not just a one-shot deal and then they're back up to market rate. They're locked in for a period of time. That I think that we would be able to work with an applicant to come up with a reasonable project that met the needs of the county as well as the applicant to provide some of that affordable housing.
Thank you.
Sure.
So at this time, is there anyone in the public that would like to discuss this item?
Yes, Colleen Platt, My Valley Springs. And Peter just touched on maybe something that will help me out here. I was trying to understand how the affordability is determined. Well, I understand that there's formulas to determine the affordability and the cost of the housing to be sold. The developer usually sets that price, right, for the marketing of the units. And so what is the oversight, I guess, to make sure that it is marketed at, if it's being applied to as an affordable unit, to make sure that it is actually sold at that price and that it stays at that price for, what did you say, 30 to 50 years or something? Right. And my concern just goes back to, I saw a project come forward a number of years ago that was being marketed as affordable, but when you look at the prices the units were being sold for, it didn't seem affordable. It seemed like it was out of that range. So that's my first question. And then second question, as far as lowering development standards, I was also of the understanding that applied to Oak Woodlands mitigation, that if a project was considered affordable, there was Oak Woodlands state laws that did not apply to it, and we got concerned about that with a project that was coming forward that we weren't really sure whether it was even affordable to start with. So that's kind of a two-part question, if you could help me understand that. Thank you.
Sure.
Sure, go ahead.
So when you're talking about how do we know it's going to stay there, on the grant deed, they record a deed restriction into that. So when that house comes back on the market again and it goes to sell, if it hasn't stayed within that low income bracket, that grant deed is going to pop up with that restriction and it's not going to be allowed to change title. So if you've got that recorded in there for that 30 to 50 year, whatever that parameter ends up being on that particular project, there is safeties in place for that.
But if okay, so the point from when the application comes forward and it's being brought forward to the planning department as an affordable unit being sold for $100,000, for example, what guarantees that price between that point and when it's actually sold then?
Because of the way that the grant deed has the restrictions written in it, you'll see in there that the people actually have to pay back any equity or capital that they gained during their home ownership. So those people that buy those homes, they're not really allowed to move up with that equity. It ends up staying back for paying back some of those incentives.
Okay.
So there's a lot of protections in place when we look at the resale on those homes that have to stay low income.
Okay, so the application that comes to you as the planning director that says it's going to be sold for $100,000, that somehow gets from your desk to the grant deed?
Yes.
And it's
That's
going to
what
go through a program like Habitat for Humanity or Mercy, as he spoke through earlier, and they're the ones that go with the state criterias, and they'll also look at, you have your sheet in here on the basis for income. That income could change over the years for our county, but you will still have that basis there for the resale on that low income.
But if it's not like a developer that knows a lot about it, like Habitat does, if it's another developer, because there are other developers that have proposed affordable housing, if they don't know all that stuff, what's that oversight?
Well, they would have to provide us a documentation to demonstrate that they meet the affordability requirements and will continue to meet the affordability requirements in the future. So if they don't know what they're doing, they're going to be on a steep learning curve to get us to the point where we can approve their project.
Okay, good. You will be oversighting that. Okay.
There's also, under Government Code 65917, a requirement. It says, in enacting this chapter, it is the intent of the legislature that the density bonus or other incentives offered by the city, county, or city and county pursuant to this chapter shall contribute significantly to the economic feasibility of lower income housing in proposed housing developments. In the absence of an agreement by a developer in accordance with section 65915, a locality shall not offer a density bonus or any other incentive that would undermine the intent of this chapter. They have to enter into an agreement that allows for those restrictions.
And that written agreement is recorded and becomes part of the deed, as Peter teased.
Great. Any other, Holly?
And then the Oak Woodland thing?
Oh, Oak Woodlands.
Well, again, this is some of the challenges that we have with competing state laws, state requirements, but conceivably they could ask for an incentive to reduce the Oak Woodland retention or mitigation requirements on a project. Yeah. So that could be an incentive.
Thank you. Holly?
Holly Mines from Railroad Flat. I read over the entire report, and I found it as confusing as you did. And I guess I'm standing from a position of wanting to see more affordable housing in Calaveras County, and you know, approving of the idea of requirements or provisions which allow developers or low-income housing developers or whoever they are to provide incentives for people who are willing to do it. But what really concerns me, I understand completely your position that we don't want to incorporate a whole bunch of wording into an ordinance, and then, you know, a year later they change the ordinance, and then we have to go through this, because I know, I will repeat this, and I know I've repeated it a lot of times. In the last housing element that was approved in 2010, this was one of the items which was supposed to be changed in the first 6 months after the housing element was approved. And now we're 5 years into that housing element and is just now being approved. So I understand that the desire not to get muddled in all this rewording. On the other hand, I think maybe as Colleen pointed out, I agree completely that any of these organizations like Mercy Housing or Habitat or the Visionary Builders, or, you know, groups that build around here, they're 100% familiar with this kind of thing, and they understand the requirements. But for those of us who would like to encourage people who are sort of standard developers, like those ones that are possibly coming up in Copperopolis, particularly around that Newtown I can't remember what the name of it is, but you know, the place, the famous place down in
Town Square.
Copperopolis. What's it called?
Is it called the Town Square?
Yeah, Town Square. There were some of us who went and spoke to Dave Haley about, well, so if you build all this housing around it and you have all these little retail stores, where are the people going to live that are attending to the stores and that sort of thing? And so we felt like we were moving in a direction of maybe getting some affordable houses included, you know, with, say, the density bonuses or whatever. But my fear is that, yeah, I agree that anybody who does this routinely understands it completely, but people who are in the business of making sort of more high-end developments, number one, they're already petrified of the idea of doing it, and number two, if there is a confusing array of requirements and documents, you know, to master, they're just going to say, well, forget it. We're not going to do that. We're not going to include any affordable housing. So the only solution I could come up with in my mind to suggest, which is not suggesting that you write anything into this ordinance, but just again reminding you of another item which was written into the last housing element, and if I understand Amy and Peter correctly, it will be included in the new one, which is about to go to the state, I believe, and that is hiring a housing coordinator for the county. And when I look at the process of going through the general plan and approving 2 housing elements in a shorter time span than the general plan was, it becomes all the more urgent, in my view, that we have a person who's dedicated to the issues, these types of issues, who knows the programs, who knows where the funding comes from, who knows the requirements, and who can then advise the director. But if Peter has to spend all of his time working these deals out, we keep hearing, well, we can't do these things because we're too busy doing, you know, just processing regular applications and attending to all the other things which are required of planning. So I'm just trying to point out the urgency, in my view, of making a position available one way or the other, where a person comes in who has expertise in this area, and that person could talk to council, you know, about, well, what if we decide to do this, rather than taking the planning director's time to sift through all this each time. And you were talking about a plan by plan, a project by project negotiation. And I've heard a lot of talk about, let's get away from these project by project evaluations, because when I was on the Planning Commission, that's the most common thing we would hear. Well, I'm willing to follow your laws, but if every time I come and I've spent $2 million getting ready, and then I come and then you say, oh no, well, we would like you to do this. Well, why didn't you tell me that when I first proposed the project? You know, so there's that battle back and forth. So anyway, I probably confused you even more, but my point is we need a housing coordinator in this county to help us sort these things out so that we don't get mired in constant confusion and interpretations of these sorts of ordinances or implementation processes or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. I'm sure having an expert like that would be of benefit to everyone, including, you know, the planning staff. And anyone
Yes.
else? Yeah, Peter says yes. Please, thank you.
I can't read it. Bill McManus still. In listening to these conversations, in the past, I've been involved in planning developments outside this county, and any developer who willingly gets into the low-income housing game usually does so at their own risk. In this particular county, we have elements that may not exist down in the valley over in the Bay Area. So there's this possibility that if the requirements are too strict for the development, does the developer then look to low-income housing as a get-out-of-requirements card so that their project can move forward? At the same time, when developers do that, it tends to degrade the entire development in order to squeeze in low-income housing, which, whether it's fewer trees, less parking, whatever the case may be, cutting down oak trees, I don't care, red-legged frogs, who cares? The entire development gets degraded to accommodate low-income housing. So what you end up with is kind of a circular firing squad that you don't quite know when you're going to pull the trigger on this thing, but it's not going to turn out great for everyone else. As a proposal, well, we thought about this years ago, that kind of parallels the operation that we have in this county for required parking, where, say for instance in Murphy's, if you open a business, build a new building, whatever, you're required to have a certain number of parking spaces to accommodate your business. Well, there is no room for parking spaces in Murphy's. So what they have is like a bank, a parking space bank, where you don't actually produce the parking spaces, but you pay for them. And then at some point in the future, when the bank has enough money, it can acquire land and develop parking for the good of everybody. And it's something, I don't know that if you can start at this point from the county level and go up, or if you have to start at the state level and come down, would be a low-income bank, where rather than the developer have to degrade his development, he could pay into that bank, as all developers would. And then at some point, that money is used to acquire land in an appropriate area that isn't going to degrade the other subdivisions, and that would become a designated low-income housing area that could be supplemented with the funds that developers have paid in. They're buying their low-income housing, the need, and they can get the benefits of it. And the county gets the benefits of it because someone else is contributing money. So it's just a question. I don't know if it's possible, but there are some parallels, as with the parking bank. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an interesting concept, but the density bonus is completely voluntary. So it's dependent upon the developer wanting to enact the density bonus or not.
Can I add to what you're saying there?
Sure.
In response to Ms. Mine's comments, we are talking about an incentive versus a requirement. Developers don't have to do any of this. If it makes financial sense to designate some percentage of their development as low income in some category, and by virtue of doing that, they get to add a few more units, and they calculate in their head, okay, the funds that I make on these extra units are going to more than compensate for the designated low income, then it makes sense, and then I'm going to go forward with that. But I think Bill brings up a very good point, is does that give them a get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to various other goals and policies that the county has with respect to any development? And that comes into play oak trees and the attractiveness of the development and whatnot. So I've just asked an unanswerable question. I understand that. But what we're looking at here is an incentive program, not a requirement program. So it has to, for the developers, they have to want to do it. And if they want to do it, the state is giving them an incentive to go forward with it. I think the bank idea is, everything's turning into a bank now. We've got mitigation banks for everything. Frogs and trees and whatnot are coming into play, salamanders. So I don't know that concept would work, because it places the bank in a particular location. And how do you pick a particular location that serves the entire county with respect to low-income housing? I mean, where are you going to put it? Who the heck wants it is another point. You're going to have another fight on your hands there. I think the idea, it seems to be the idea with this code, is that the low-income housing is indeed dispersed throughout the county and throughout a development. So you kind of don't see it so much. And they even say that it's not supposed to look any different than any of the other houses that are priced at market, at value. So I think it would run afoul of that goal. It's an interesting concept, but it runs afoul of that goal, and it produces a situation where eventually the chickens come home to roost, and you've got to build this thing. Whether it's a parking lot somewhere or a housing development for low income, everything's on the come, and I think that's when the stuff hits the fan for somebody, and you've got a big fight on your hands.
I think you're absolutely right. Now, there are a number of cities and counties that do have banking programs such that. They're often included as a part of what's called inclusionary housing, which is where developers are required to provide a certain percentage of affordable housing, and they can pay an in lieu fee to a bank to do that. Those are very controversial ordinances, typically when those kind of things are passed. But that would be sort of in addition to, or another means to try to address the housing concerns of a community.
But where that works is in a city that's fairly tight and confined, so that when you put a development in there, those people that live there have access to the various amenities within that city. In a county like ours, where we're scattered to the winds, I don't see that it would work.
It is more challenging in a rural jurisdiction, there's no question about that.
Any other questions, comments from the public? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the Planning Commission for additional questions, deliberation.
I'm ready for the recommendation.
Okay. I might just say this has been a really educational discussion, and I've enjoyed it, and it's been, I think, very beneficial.
You could thank the state of California for that.
So are we ready for the recommendation? Peter?
Back to my recommendation here. So I recommend that the commission pass a motion to adopt resolution 2015-001 to authorize the chair to sign, saying, recommending that the board of supervisors adopt the negative declaration and approve 2014-044 zoning ordinance amendment, amending section 17.04.200 of the Calaveras County Code.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Noes? Okay, 5-0, the motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, we come to the public comment period. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to address the commission, now's your last chance.
Still Bill McManus. What I wanted to bring up is try to find a commissioner who might pick up some of the leftover baggage that got lost between flights on the general plan. Some 4 years ago, when we were suffering under the Mittner-Harnisch torture chamber, we were presented with 3 options for the general plan. In meetings in San Andreas and Arnold, and I believe it was Rancho. It was a park somewhere. But anyway, no, it was where Tofanelli was. Yeah, it was somewhere out there. In conjunction with the Taxpayers Association and other people, we developed a 4th alternative, which we called Alternative D. Now, we put together the plan at the Arnold General Plan meeting, which Mittner-Harnisch resisted that very much, then took it to San Andreas for the full Board of Supervisors to review. To the best of my knowledge, the Board of Supervisors agreed to have Alternative D included in the general plan proposals, so that it was something you could choose from. Since then, 4 years, I don't know what happened to it. Maybe it dried out and blew away, but I have not heard of Alternative D. And yet that was something that the Board of Supervisors clearly spoke on 4 years ago. as being an option that seemed to satisfy more people in all of the districts and not just in various areas where there were general plan controversies. So I would like to know if anyone can dig up, and unfortunately Uncle Al isn't here because he could probably give you the paperwork of what we did with alternative D and get that back on the table for consideration before you close the hood on the general plan. Along with that, a couple of months ago at the Board of Supervisors meeting, Mr. Maurer was discussing some elements of the general plan. I can't remember exactly the context of that conversation, but he mentioned the word emergency housing. Well, there was almost a noticeable gasp in the audience, I don't know if you could hear it up here, of what is emergency housing? A lot of people think, well, if a hurricane comes through, this is someplace you go in an emergency, or fire, or use a school gymnasium or something like that. As it came out later, and I think it was Supervisor Ponte who wanted clarification on the term emergency housing. It is, in fact, a homeless shelter. And so I'm wondering, for the purposes of the general plan, should the wording in the general plan be changed to be a little bit more descriptive for everyone to completely understand at its sound what you're talking about, and not have to take words and translate them into something else? Now, I understand that the term homeless shelter may not appeal to a lot of people, and it may cause people to get excited about it, but that's what they're entitled to do. They need to know exactly what you have planned for those areas. So it's just a request, that maybe the commission can say, let's use plain English, easily understood words to describe very important components of the general plan. We went through this with Mettner-Harnisch. It was a shell game for years, and an expensive shell game. We don't want to go through that again. We want the people to understand what is going to be in their general plan, and not have to later find out that, geez, I guess I should have asked. So that would be my request of the commission, is to take a look at making sure that the plan is easily understood. And I'm not saying people are dummies. All I'm saying is not everyone speaks government speak. And so we need these things to be immediately understood when they hear it, or read it in the paper, or whatever else. So that would be my second request. And, geez, I think that's just about it. So if a commissioner feels up to it, I'd love to work with them, resurrect alternative D, and see if we can get it put back in the plan, because we've already been through that process. It's been vetted, it's been approved, and we were told it was going to be part of the plan. I haven't seen it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the general plan has changed a lot in the last 4 years. I'm not even sure what happened to A, B, or C, let alone D. It's lots of...
If it changed in the dark.
I don't, I can't respond to that. I'm just saying I know that the discussion of those alternatives, I don't believe is on the table anymore. That's my impression. I don't know, Peter, you weren't here. You probably have never heard of alternative D.
No, this is the first I've heard of that, correct. There's been a lot of evolution over the past, several years.
Right.
I tried to pick up where my predecessors left off. And I'll certainly go back and look up alternative D and see, what that was and how that fits into, the overall direction that I believe the board wants me to go. But it's still draft form, so
Right.
it ain't over yet.
I would certainly want to read alternative D to see what was in it. I've been poring over the general plan. I might as well pore over an alternative D of the general plan. So I would want to see what was in it, and if there was any rationale for it being shelved, I'd like to hear that after I've read it and understood it. So I haven't heard of it. I want to know about it. And I also want to second what Mr. McManus is talking about when he's calling for plain language in any communications that the general public needs to know about. Even though we write ordinances and we write general plans and whatnot, it doesn't mean that it needs to be in planning department E's. There are plain language alternatives to all of these, in all of these documents, and all of these uses, but particularly when it comes to writing summaries for the benefit of this commission, for example. I want to see it in plain language. I don't want to have to guess what a word means or look through and look it up in context and try to and work that hard to understand it. It ought to be understandable on its face. And I have seen, I mean, my version of the general plan is marked up with red ink and circles and question marks. What the heck does that mean? I shouldn't have to do that. And the public shouldn't have to work that hard to understand it either. And it gives people the impression that someone with a particular level of skill and training in the writing of general plans, for example, is able to write an element in a way that only they understand it, only their breed of people, only their people with that training will understand it, and the general public cannot, and therefore cannot intelligently comment on it. I get that impression very distinctly when I read Minter Harnish general plan language, and I know that's where it came from, and there's no reason for it. You can take, even if it takes a few extra sentences to explain something in plain language, it's certainly worth it.
I agree.
That's all.
Marty?
Marty Crane, Valley Springs. Well, first of all, Fawn, thank you. I totally agree. This has been an excellent discussion, and I'm grateful to every single person in this room who has contributed big time. Thank you for bringing your real estate expertise. I retired from 20 years in escrow in Orange County. I get that. Thank you. And with regard to the plain language, you are singing my song. I've been talking about this for years, and I think that when we get into a field of expertise and we're in it for so long that we tend to forget when we first started, how did we perceive what we were reading? And we had this discussion at the Board of Supervisors recently, just the other day, about the notification that we might, how would we notify the public? Perhaps a postcard or something. And my take on that, and I asked Ms. Ponte, she has experience through Foothill Retirement Village. She has experience in knowing how the general public receives what they put out. So it's not just what you want them to know, it's how they receive it. So test marketing this, and I see we're going to get a little test market going here at the Planning Commission. I appreciate that, applaud it big time. And I also wanted to say that because you haven't seen D, I'm not surprised, because we all know that the Planning Commissioner directors have changed over the years numerous times. The Planning Commissioners have changed, the Board of Supervisors have changed, staff has changed, everything, all the faces are different. The only consistent voice in the planning process over all these last 8 or 9 years is the Calaveras Action Project and the underlying Calaveras Planning Coalition. They have a bank of all the documents. They're a wealth of information. And like Ms. Platt was saying, it is on their website, there for the public. And without that, we would every day be starting over. And every time we have a new planning director, members of the CAP or Planning Coalition meet with them to try to bring them up to speed. But every new planning director comes in, with that comes another volume on top of the other volumes. So it's a big job. It's huge. And I'm grateful that you brought up Dee, because I was in that meeting, of course, and in town hall, and it was overwhelming. People worked through it, and they had A, B, C, D, and what worked up in the high country didn't necessarily work for down here. And we were talking about all of that. It was fully vetted. So if we keep reinventing what we discovered before, instead of building on what the community and the supervisors and everyone already had these community conversations, if we keep saying, we're going to do that again because I wasn't there, that's a challenge. You know, we will just keep going, circling the drain. So anyway, I applaud your efforts. Thank you. This is a wonderful conversation, and I'll be back.
I just wanted to quickly respond to some of the organizations that Marty was talking about. To my way of thinking, the general plan is a county document. It's kind of sacred, even though it hasn't, had the last rubber band wrapped around it and put away. Those papers, those ideas, those concepts, all the discussions we had appear to be gone. Now, some of the organizations she's mentioned, I'm not going to go into it, also have their own agendas, whether you consider one to be an Agenda 21 agenda or something else. They have not been good custodians of the general plan, obviously, because Alternative D is missing in action. And I'd like to find out where it's at, why it wasn't incorporated into the current configuration of the general plan, and take it from there. I just don't want to see it lost. We worked a long time. We worked very hard. Marty, everybody in the county did. They were probably some of the most highly attended meetings that I've seen in my entire life in Calaveras County. They were packed. People were excited. They were motivated. New ideas came out. We literally sat and tore up the general plan, the original cut and paste, which was scissors and Scotch tape, to build Alternative D and kind of carefully take it up to the front so it wouldn't fall apart. And that seemed to be the consensus of the people. And even though it wasn't the consensus of the consultants. And so we'd like to see the will of the people preserved, unless you want to go through and, reinvent that whole Alternative D wheel again. Thank you.
I didn't mean to say that they're the only bank, but they're the one consistent bank. But I have been to many meetings in Copperopolis and West Point and Railroad Flat, town meetings where we've talked about planning over the years. And that brings up another thing. There are thousands and thousands of hours all over the county of people giving of their time and their money and their expertise, and hundreds of meetings in all the different communities, pulling together their voice. And that's why I think that is the voice of the people, those community plans that have all been worked, including the D. And I don't know if that's on this site or not, but it probably is, I don't know. But the general plan is the voice of the people, right? And if we are directing or trying to find a way to afford to maintain our infrastructure, and we are therefore directing or trying to encourage development in our town centers, these community plans are the voices of those town centers. And so to not include those in the general plan would be a huge mistake. And I just wanted to make sure that we say that one more time. But I didn't want it to sound like to the exclusion of any other groups working out there, because we're all part of this. And this is just a bank, a library of all of this information available to everyone. Thank you.
Bill McManus again. I don't think that the board should agonize over this a whole whole lot. Going back into the Minton-Harnish years, at this point in time, Calaveras County was supposed to have over 60,000 people. We now find that their estimate was a little bit off, and instead of an expanding county, we actually have a contracting county. So that the reason that we all selected, I shouldn't all, the huge majority of people selected alternative D was that it could expand and contract and not have to, it wouldn't put a burden on the county or the people despite any direction in the change of population, whether there were more people or whether there were fewer people. And so it was just, I don't know why the general plan's so hard. You know, you talk about a transportation or different elements and things like that. There are fewer people here now than there were 10 years ago. What we had then, as far as I'm concerned, you could stamp it and say it's good for another year or 10 years or whatever the case may be. I know you have to comply with state law, but remember, this county is shrinking. We're not expanding. So any alternative or number or whatever you want to do with the general plan needs to reflect reality, not the estimates of experts that have been proven time and time again to be inaccurate. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I would just say that there's no one more disappointed than myself that the community plans are not specifically included in this draft of the general plan. And that it is a draft. There is hope. And that, you know, working with your supervisor, I would encourage everyone to make the case that community plans are where the people live. That's where the infrastructure is. And a lot of these communities that submitted community plans, they are the voice of the people. They did already demonstrate what they wanted. And so I would just say don't give up the ship yet, but just keep working together and with your supervisor to get them back in play with the general plan. Any other comments before we close the
Yeah, I'd like
meeting?
to react to something Mr. McManus was mentioning, and that is this projection of growth in the county that I think produced a lot of the language and elements in the Minter-Harnish version. And I think people have to understand that people that are in the planning consulting business, they're in it for the money, for one thing. And in order for them to be needed, they have to, it's their incentive is to project a lot of change in an area. A lot of change in an area means you need a lot of papers, a lot of language to control that change. And that's what they get paid for, is making thick documents. I'm generalizing here, but I don't think I'm too far off base. They can't come to a county like ours and say, for $1 million, we'll give you what you need and it's this big. This is not worth $1 million. This is worth $1 million. And that's how they play the game. They can't come to a county and say, there's not much that's really going to change over the next 30, 40 years in your county, so you don't need a hell of a lot. They have to come to our county if they want to sell us $1 million worth of work and to say, there are going to be huge hurdles in front of you for the next several decades. That's why you need us, and that's why you have to pay us a lot of money. That's how the game is played. So that's how we ended up here, is that a board of supervisors some number of years ago bought that bill of goods, and we're stuck with it, and we're digging our way out of it. And that's why my approach to the general plan has been to go back, look backwards, not just say, okay, how can we tweak this thing that we've got and get on with it? I'm going back to the beginning. I'm going to say, where did this thing get, where did we turn left, and why did we turn left, and understand it from the very beginning so that my recommendations will be as sound as I can make them.
Anyone else? Okay, well,
Before you close, are we supposed to give these back to Annette or something?
probably. She probably won't let you leave the building. So thank you very much, excellent meeting, and I am going to adjourn the Planning Commission meeting. Thank you very much. Thanks all of you that came out and
What are we supposed to
with
give
us.